12 days before his death, Max Spiers sent his mother a text that simply said, "Your boy's in trouble." No one knew what that meant. 12 days later, he was gone. His body was found in Poland, and the story that followed was anything but simple. Some say he was sick. Others believe he was silenced. Before his death, Max had been talking about secret cloning labs, mind control programs, and military experiments that were never supposed to be public. He called it proof of a hidden system built to control human evolution. Authorities called it nonsense. But when his laptop came back completely wiped and his phone mysteriously destroyed, even skeptics started asking questions. Was Max just another conspiracy theorist who went too far, or did he stumble onto something real? In early 2016, Max Spiers returned to Canterbury, England, after several years in the United States. He moved back in with his mother, Vanessa Bates, to what looked like a calm, ordinary life. Yet beneath the calm of his hometown, Max was far from at peace. He was appearing on podcasts, YouTube live streams, and online interviews, talking about things most people never dared to say out loud. To his followers, he wasn't just another speaker, he was a super soldier, someone who claimed to have been part of covert experiments under government control. He described programs like MK Ultra and something he called Project Mannequin. He spoke about genetically engineered operatives, about people created for missions that never made the news. He said they wanted them to be predictable and programmable. Friends noticed a change in him that spring. He seemed tired, anxious, and always alert, like someone waiting for a message that never came. His close friend Sarah Adams later said he seemed nervous but focused, like he really believed everything he was saying and just couldn't stop. In his last few months in England, Max's interviews took a darker tone. The more he spoke, the more he hinted that something was closing in. He kept saying things like, "This is 2016, everything's reaching its peak, and it needs to be dealt with right now." He also talked about psychic attacks, astral interference, and unseen forces trying to silence him.
The build-up over the last 6 months coming to Poland has been tumultuous, to say the least. I have been under psychic attack, under astral attack, and under physical attack to stop me from coming to Warsaw to be able to convey this information.
By April, his anxiety had turned into urgency. In an online interview, he claimed to have uncovered connections between secret US military programs and an underground network involving abuse and cloning, including his investigations into the Presidio Child Development Center run by the Army in San Francisco. To him, it was all part of the same system, an invisible structure shaping human behavior for hidden agendas. He said he had to share it before they could silence him. Then came the message that would change everything. An invitation arrived for him to speak at a conference in Warsaw, Poland. The event, called the Earth Project, focused on alternative science and hidden history. Organisers asked him to give a talk about cloning programs and secret military projects. He accepted immediately. Within weeks, he was on a plane, carrying with him the notes, recordings, and theories he believed the world needed to hear. In April 2016, travel records confirmed that Max Spiers boarded a flight from London to Warsaw. He arrived at Chopin Airport, where he was greeted by event coordinators for the Earth Project conference. Event organisers later described him as friendly but visibly drained. He had flown in with just one suitcase and a laptop filled with documents. That night, he stayed with writer and publisher Monica Duval, who offered to host him during his stay in Warsaw. In her official statement years later, she recalled that he was exhausted, paranoid, and pushing himself non-stop. She also said he barely ate. Sometimes he'd stay up all night typing or pacing the living room. Still, when the day of the conference arrived, Max appeared determined. The Earth Project event drew a small but devoted audience. People interested in hidden technology, UFOs, and secret government programs. He began by sharing a bit of his background before moving into his talk about super soldiers. Then he went on to,
I was born into a specific bloodline, and I was targeted as an individual. Okay, so I was targeted as an individual from birth. The trauma begins With me, the trauma began whilst in the womb of the mother. So, so whilst the fetus is inside the woman, if the mother is then traumatized, then that in turn traumatizes the child immediately. Then the child is then taken away from the mother immediately, and then there are a number of different ways to traumatize, to split the mind of the child so that it alters maybe like a honeycomb, a beehive honeycomb.
Then he went on to talk about programs that started with Nazi scientists after World War II and were designed to split a child's mind before the age of 3 using electric shock and trauma. According to him, once the mind was fractured, symbols, sounds or gestures could trigger hidden personalities, turning people into perfect spies, assassins or even celebrities without them realizing it. He claimed this tech was part of something called the My7 Zygote Project, which was supposedly an MI6 program that mixed DNA from parents to create children who looked normal but were genetically engineered for control. From there, he said the real conflict was a war of DNA involving bloodlines that trace back to figures like King Charlemagne, who he described as having reptilian traits. Max talked about ancient DNA manipulation, the Anunnaki, and projects named Oak Tree and Ibis that were meant to track souls or control reincarnations of powerful beings like Hermes and Lucifer. He even suggested that everyone at the conference had lived through the fall of Atlantis and a war on Mars thousands of years ago. He tied modern governments and intelligence agencies to Nazi scientists brought to America after the war, saying they secretly built the CIA and NSA. According to him, most world leaders meet in the astral plane before their decisions show up in real life, and the moon is actually an artificial structure used to trap souls and recycle them back to Earth. Before finishing, he warned that London was being turned into the new Babylon, and that an AI system in Belgium, which he called the Beast Computer, was monitoring every human on Earth. But he ended on a hopeful note, saying the heart was the one thing that couldn't be controlled, calling it humanity's direct link to something higher.
Is the most resilient part of the human being. It's the heart that they have the most trouble with, because it's directly connected to divine source. And what this particular consciousness, vampiric parasitic consciousness, is trying to do is take over control of everything away from God's source.
After the talk, witnesses say he looked pale, shaky, and withdrawn. He left quietly and returned to Monica's apartment, where he continued to work alone for days. His messages to family stayed brief. To his mother, he texted, "If anything happens to me, look into it. Investigate. I think I might be murdered." By mid-July, his health was visibly declining. He told Monica he couldn't shake his fever and felt weak all the time. Yet even then, he refused to rest. His last message on social media read simply, "I'm good. I am just way too tired." It was July 16th, 2016. Max had been resting on Monica's sofa for most of the day, still unwell after returning from Cyprus earlier that week. He had told her more than once that he felt something was wrong. According to Monica's statement to police, he kept saying, "They're coming for me," and that satanic groups were after him. Later that evening, his condition suddenly worsened. Monica said he began vomiting, releasing brown tea-coloured fluid that she described as gastric fluids pouring out of him. She said she saw bits of food in his mouth and tried to turn him on his side, but the fluid wouldn't stop. Monica tried to help, but he was barely responsive. Then she called for an ambulance. Paramedics arrived a short while later, but it was too late. The time of death was marked as 6:15 p.m, stating, "Fluid, black fluid in mouth removed, intubation performed, death pronounced." The doctor called the death natural causes, so because of that, no forensic inspection was done. The hours after Max's death slipped into days of confusion and silence. His body remained inside Monica Duval's apartment through the night, untouched. By the next morning, police and medical personnel had already signed off on the paperwork. From that moment, everything began to unravel. For 12 long days, Max's mother, Vanessa Bates, tried to understand what had happened. She said no one called her directly from the authorities. When she finally reached them, the only document she received was a Polish death certificate that said natural causes. She was told that officials could not release her son's full file because she didn't have his written permission. Behind the scenes, embassy staff in Warsaw confirmed to the British consulate that the body had not been examined or tested. Legal correspondence from Polish prosecutors later admitted that no autopsy had been performed before the body was released. For Vanessa, it made no sense. She learned through her lawyers that Max's body had been left in Monica's home overnight before being moved to a local mortuary. When the body was finally sent back to England, it arrived in a sealed lead casket. Officials warned the family not to open it. They were told decomposition had already gone too far. Vanessa didn't want to see her son like that, but Max's sister insisted. Vanessa later shared more details on this in an online interview 9 years ago.
My daughter insisted that she wanted to see her brother, and so she did. And they had a veil over his face, and his body completely covered right up to his neck. So she had to lean right over, and she said his face was as black as charcoal, like black.
A post-mortem was carried out at Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother Hospital in Margate, but it gave no clear answers. The first report was inconclusive. Later, the inquest concluded that Max had died from pneumonia and drug intoxication, which led to him choking on his own stomach contents. The prosecutor repeated the same verdict, again calling it natural causes. When Vanessa received his laptop and phone later, both had been wiped clean. Every file, photo and folder was gone. The SIM card from his phone was missing, though it was mailed back to her weeks later. Only one image remained on his computer, a screenshot of text messages between Max and someone with the initials HS. Vanessa said she couldn't stop thinking about what he told her before he left for Poland. He had warned her that he was naming powerful people, and that it could get him killed. When reporters later asked her what she believed, she said she was convinced something about his death didn't add up. News of his death spread quickly, and at his memorial in Canterbury, friends and supporters came together, still searching for answers, still trying to make sense of what had happened. After Max's death, his supporters began tracing back through his work to find what might have made him a target. The theory that gained the most ground was that Max had uncovered the modern face of MK Ultra. He had said many times that the old Cold War mind control projects never really ended. According to him, they just changed their names and moved underground. Max had described these programs as still active, now hidden within defense research, psychology labs, and even entertainment networks. He said they were no longer about secret prisons or chemical experiments, but about total psychological control. He told listeners that he was part of it once, that he had been trained under something called Project Mannequin, a British offshoot of MK Ultra. He said it targeted children from certain families, chosen for their bloodlines, and conditioned them to obey commands without remembering anything afterwards. People who worked with him, like journalist Miles Johnston, later claimed that Max believed he was about to expose a new generation of mind control systems. Johnston said Max told him he was close to proving that psychological warfare and trauma-based programming had evolved into something global. He said Max described it as a fifth column of predators inside humanity itself. The story connects directly to something called Project Monarch. Supporters say it was a secret branch of MK Ultra, built to create programmed agents and slaves through trauma. In that system, people were tortured until their minds fractured into separate identities. These identities could be switched on or off by a handler, making the person both unaware and obedient. The name Monarch came from the butterfly, a symbol of transformation. Max had spoken about this in several videos, saying that the project used extreme trauma to make someone forget who they were and remember only the commands given to them. Those who followed his work believe that this is what led to his death. They point to the pattern of whistleblowers who have exposed government experiments and died suddenly after. They say Max became too visible, too detailed, and too public. He was no longer talking in theory, he was naming places and people. Other figures in the same research circle, like former intelligence consultant James Martinez, argue that the experiments never stopped, but simply moved into new forms: psychological operations, pharmaceuticals, and neural research. Martinez has said that the mental health industry and parts of the tech world now continue what MK Ultra began. He describes it as the AI endgame, a digital version of the same goal to control the human mind without the subject realizing it. People link all of this back to Max's warnings before his death and his belief that he was being watched and attacked because he had proof of these reactivated projects. They claim that his death in Poland was not random, that it was part of a pattern designed to silence anyone who got close to uncovering the truth. After Max's work on mind control, his focus shifted towards something even more extreme. He began claiming that he had uncovered active human cloning programs operating in secret facilities across Eastern Europe. According to certain people, this was the discovery that sealed his fate. Max described what he called synthetic humans, living copies created from real DNA in underground labs. He said they were grown for specific purposes: soldiers, workers, and even replacements for political figures. Supporters of his research believe that these cloning sites were connected to military programs and defense contracts hidden under research names that sounded harmless. Max often mentioned that the goal was total control. In their view, cloning wasn't about creating life, it was about creating obedience. He often spoke about two secret projects, Oak Tree and Ibis. Project Oak Tree, he said, focused on identifying children born with special genetic traits, tracing specific bloodlines that carried high energy or psychic potential. These children were allegedly taken or conditioned through trauma-based programs to break down their natural will. Project Ibis, according to Max, was the next stage: genetic manipulation designed to merge ancient DNA from symbolic figures like Isis with modern human hosts. The idea was that these experiments could open stargates, or portals of consciousness, linking humans to higher or otherworldly realms. Whistleblowers tied to intelligence communities claimed that cloning technology had existed for decades, and that the most advanced projects had migrated underground after the Cold War. Max believed that the origin of these experiments could be traced back to Nazi scientists who were quietly absorbed into Western intelligence after World War II under Operation Paperclip. He said their research into genetic manipulation never stopped, it only changed locations. He spoke about a hidden Fourth Reich operating in underground cities and tunnels across Europe. These bases, he claimed, held the technology to alter or even copy human DNA, producing new forms of life that were biologically human but spiritually hollow. Followers of this theory say Max himself was part of these experiments. They claim that he wasn't just researching cloning, he was living proof of it. In their view, his memories, his strange health problems, and his feeling of being linked to other versions of himself were signs of a fractured consciousness spread across multiple bodies. They point to his repeated statement that he could feel what happened to his clones, as if part of his mind existed somewhere else. And when he died in Poland, the same region where he said these facilities operated, his supporters saw it as more than a coincidence. They believe he had crossed the line between exposing the project and becoming one of its casualties. Some of Max's closest followers believe he wasn't just uncovering intelligence secrets, but something far older and more dangerous. They say he was tracing a hidden network of ritual practices tied to people in power. According to his fiancée, Sarah Adams, Max told her he was researching a secret circle of black magicians. Not the kind from fiction, but groups that he said operated inside political and military circles. He believed their ceremonies used real energy, not symbols or myth. He was getting ready to name names, and that is when the threats began. Adams said he was told that both of them were going to die. In several interviews, Max spoke about black magic as a system of control. He said it was not about spells, but about manipulating the same energy that runs through all living things. He described it as using electromagnetic force for selfish gain, to harm or even kill. In his view, the highest members of global power structures practiced this form of control. They performed rituals of sex, sacrifice, and death to charge what he called vampiric consciousness, feeding on fear and emotion to influence the world. He often said that these rituals weren't limited to secret rooms. He saw signs of them in public events such as Olympic ceremonies, celebrity concerts, and even televised media. In his words, these spectacles worked as mass rituals, pulling energy from millions of viewers who had no idea what was happening. But Max's investigation didn't stop at symbols and energy. He followed testimonies from what he called ritual abuse survivors. These were people who claimed to have lived through systematic abuse linked to occult practices. His research took him to reports from the Presidio, a military base in San Francisco, where a childcare centre had once been at the heart of a scandal. The accused, according to Max, were tied to a group called the Temple of Set. The Temple of Set, he explained, was founded by Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, a former US military officer. Max said Aquino represented a connection between the military and dark occult networks. He believed programs like MK Ultra, officially known for mind control experiments, were deeply rooted in satanic ritual abuse. Victims were conditioned through trauma to blur the lines between pain and pleasure, a concept summed up by the phrase, "pain is pleasure and pleasure is pain." For Max, this was not just cruelty. It was a method to break a person's mind and rebuild it for control. He spoke of bloodlines and rituals that carried ancient power, where trauma was used to implant what he called a dormant kill switch. According to him, these switches could be triggered years later, sometimes causing victims to take their own lives when memories began to surface. In his later recordings, Max mentioned a name that chilled even his listeners. He spoke of the Draco Prime, beings he described as non-human, almost reptilian in nature, sitting above the human hierarchy of power. He said these entities thrived on domination and fear, and that their influence extended through those who served them. Max often admitted he was afraid. He said people who tried to expose these forces faced attacks not just in the physical world, but on a mental and spiritual level. He described sensations of being drained or targeted through psychic means, claiming that the pressure built until one could barely function. There is another theory about what happened after Max's death. It doesn't focus on poisoning or rituals, it focuses on information. According to this view, Max wasn't just silenced physically, he was erased digitally. Every trace of his work, every message, every file was gone within hours. His mother, Vanessa Bates, said that when her son's laptop was returned from Poland, it was empty. Not one email, not one document. She described it as being completely wiped. The SIM card from his phone had been removed, and the phone itself no longer worked. Authorities told her it had been dropped in the bathtub. To those who believe this theory, that explanation felt too convenient. Researchers who followed Max's work described what he left behind as a digital mountain. Years of interviews, documents, and data about secret programs. The sudden disappearance of all that material seemed impossible without expert involvement. People in this camp believe a coordinated cyber operation was launched to scrub his devices clean and cut off any trail. They say the wipe was not an accident, but a targeted act of information control. Just days before his death, Max had told his followers he was done with vague posts and planned to release names. He had set up a new website called maxspiers.com and promised to share everything in full detail. Then he was gone, and so was his data. Even the investigation into his death recognised how important those devices were. Coroner Alan Blunsden said they needed forensic funding to examine the laptop and phone, but it took months before that could happen. By then, whatever could have been recovered was likely lost. When people talk about strange deaths connected to secret work, Max Spiers isn't the only name that comes up. Two others are often mentioned in the same breath: Gareth Williams and Phil Schneider. Both men spoke about things most of us never get to see. Both died in ways that left more questions than answers. Let's start with Gareth Williams. He was a codebreaker and data analyst working for Britain's MI6, the country's intelligence agency. In August 2010, he was found dead in his apartment in London. What made his case so unusual was where they found him. Inside a padlocked sports bag, placed in the bathtub. There were no fingerprints on the bag, not even his own. The room was spotless, and his computer files had been carefully cleared. Police first thought it might have been an accident, but that explanation never sat right with the public. Members of Parliament questioned how a top intelligence worker could die that way, while under government watch. The Metropolitan Police later suggested it was a sex-related accident, but forensic experts said the bag could not have been zipped shut from the inside. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened, and some of his work files remain sealed by national security orders. Then there's Phil Schneider. He was a geological engineer, claimed to have worked on secret underground military bases in the US. In the early 90s, he started giving public talks about government projects he said were hidden from the public, even showing scars he claimed came from an underground encounter. In 1996, he was found dead in his Oregon apartment. Authorities ruled that he took his own life, but his friends and family disagreed, saying there were signs of a struggle and missing documents. Schneider had often told audiences that if he were ever found dead, people should look closer. I've actually covered his story in detail before, so if you want the full breakdown of what happened to Phil Schneider, I'll link that video at the end. Those two stories, Gareth Williams in London and Phil Schneider in Oregon, are often used as comparisons to Max Spiers. Each case involves a person who may have known too much and who died in a way that made no sense to those closest to them. What stands out most is how the pattern repeats. Sudden deaths, missing data, confusing investigations, and in every case, silence from the institutions involved. After hearing so many wild ideas about what happened to Max, it helps to stop for a moment and look at what doctors and scientists actually say. Some think there was nothing supernatural or secretive about his death at all. To them, it was a tragic mix of illness, exhaustion, and fear. Forensic experts who reviewed reports from Warsaw focused first on what shocked everyone most: the black fluid. Doctors explained that this can happen when someone has a serious chest infection or pneumonia. When the lungs fill with fluid or blood, it can be pushed up through the throat during coughing or choking. Others pointed out that black liquid can also appear when blood mixes with stomach acid. Toxicologists later said that certain medications, if combined or taken while sick, can cause vomiting that looks the same. A few scientists also suggested that Max may have been fighting a bacterial infection that went untreated. Infections like that can cause sepsis, which spreads quickly through the body and shuts down organs. If he was taking antibiotics or painkillers at the same time, the drugs could have interacted in a dangerous way. Clinical researcher Dr. Mark Griffiths explains that drug interaction and dehydration can trigger sudden respiratory failure even if the dosage seems small. It only takes a few minutes without oxygen for the heart to stop. Then there was the other side of the story, the one that no test can fully measure. Psychiatrists who studied the case from afar said Max's final months showed signs of severe stress and insomnia. He told friends that his phone was being tapped and that he was followed wherever he went. According to psychiatrist Dr. David Spiegel from Stanford University, chronic sleep loss can make the brain lose touch with what's real, turning worry into certainty. When paranoia mixes with exhaustion, the body stays on constant alert. People who knew Max said he often looked restless and tense, as if he could never relax. He sometimes spoke about being under psychic or electronic attack, and that kind of fear can eat away at anyone's mental strength. Constant stress can cause real physical pain, chest tightness, shortness of breath, and dizziness. Over time, those symptoms can trick a person into believing their fears are proof of danger. When the body and mind reach that point, even a small infection or reaction can become deadly. The immune system weakens, the heart races, and every function starts to collapse. Some experts believe that is exactly what happened to Max. His body was tired, his mind was overwhelmed, and the pressure of everything he carried finally broke him down. So maybe there was no secret operation, no hidden ritual, no invisible hand. Maybe it was just a human being, sick and scared, who reached the edge of what one person can take. Concerning the lack of proper investigation, another side of the story emerges. It isn't about hidden enemies or secret codes. It's about paperwork, law, and timing. Things that can turn tragic cases into tangled messes. Legal experts who reviewed Max's case explained that international law can make even simple investigations hard to finish. When a person dies overseas, the country where it happens has full control over what comes next. That means Poland was responsible for the autopsy, the police reports, and the early toxicology work. The United Kingdom could not step in until the body was officially returned. Embassy staff and records specialists said this kind of delay is common. Every country has its own rules about how evidence is stored and how long it can take to approve lab tests. In Max's case, that meant important toxicology results were held up for months. During that time, samples can decay or become contaminated, which makes later testing less reliable. One British coroner pointed out that the Polish investigation had been wholly incompetent, but legal analysts said that might not mean corruption. It could just be the result of limited resources. In smaller police districts, it's not unusual for officers to handle complex foreign cases without the right training or lab access. Researchers at the London School of Economics who study cross-border legal work have written about this before. They found that miscommunication between embassies and local police can delay evidence by weeks or even years. Examples of this have happened before. In 2016, the death of British student Richard Cole in Greece was delayed for over a year because Greek and British authorities couldn't agree on who should pay for a second autopsy. When things like that happen, families are left waiting, and the silence makes the mystery feel deeper than it really is. Experts say that confusion, not secrecy, often explains why answers take so long. Max's case fell right into that gap. Poland had the scene and the first reports. Britain had the family and the inquest. Each waited for the other to act. And in that space, the story started to grow on its own. But after everything that has been said, after all the theories and reports, what's left is a quiet space. It's strange how time softens everything. The noise around his death has faded, but the questions remain. Scientists, journalists and believers all still pull at different threads, each sure they're right. For his family, though, it was never about conspiracy. It was about a son who never came home. His mother, Vanessa Bates, once said, "He died for telling the truth." And if you remember that Phil Schneider story I mentioned earlier, his case had some eerie similarities. If you want to see how the two connect, that video's on your screen right now. Give it a watch after this one.